Hey guys, welcome back. So today, a subscriber sent me a generator in a box. I had helped her a few months back sort out some issues with her inverter generator, and she subsequently traded it. She wanted to upsize, and she found someone looking to downsize. So she traded her 2200 watt Ryobi for a 5500 watt Coleman generator. And the guy she traded with threw this in. It is a Honda EX1000. It's about 30 years old and it has some run issues. According to Brenda, who's the person who sent me this, it runs for 5 or 10 minutes and then shuts down. And the guy she got it from was done trying to fix it. He had replaced the coil and the carburetor, and still the issue persists. So let's get this out of the box, make sure it survived the trip, and go from there. I'd say this one survived. And not only that, but this is a very clean generator. It was well taken care of. It also includes the original carburetor and coil in case we need that. And there's also a note on the top, as well as some tape over the fuel cap. Now, I was made aware of this, but when draining the tank, I know Brenda was drying it out with a shop towel, and the towel fell in. So I'll start there. We'll get that towel out. And then I want to check the oil. This was shipped with oil in it. And if this was laid down at all on its side, that oil may have left the block and made its way into the carburetor or the air filter. So let's get the tank squared away. We'll deal with the oil, and maybe I'll try to start it. Looks like I got it all out. I was a little bit worried. I wasn't sure if that towel was going to break down. It was in there for a few days, but I think we're okay. So we'll get that note off of there, turn this generator around, and take a look at that air filter. Very cool. It even has the original spark plug removal tool. And I can just see a corner of the engine here. It looks to be very clean. So I don't think this has seen much use over its 30-year life. There is some evidence that some oil may have leaked out of the breather. Thankfully, where it's positioned, I don't think it would have gone into the carburetor. So let's take a look at the filter element itself, make sure that that's not soaked. Well, the filter is not saturated with oil, but it is degraded and falling apart. So I can't run it with this air filter. So I'm going to leave this off for now. It will have to be replaced. But I think this should be safe to start, assuming we have oil. So I'll check that real quick and add some fuel and try starting it. Plenty of oil. Needs to be changed, but worry about that later. Not getting any signs of life from this engine, so I'm going to give it a little squirt of starting fluid and try it again. Still nothing from that engine, so I'm thinking we have a spark issue. The compression feels good, so let's get the spark tester on there and see if it lights up. It lights up, but that is very weak spark, so I doubt it's enough to spark on the plug. And I'm thinking either the coil is on backwards or maybe it's bad. Not sure, but something is definitely going on with the spark. I think we're going to have to dig in and take a look. I'm fairly certain I can't get that blower housing off without removing the tank. I only see a bolt in the bottom left and right, and I'm pretty sure there's one on top right under that tank. So I need to peel some more layers off to access that bolt. got the spark plug out, so there's no compression fighting me. I'm going to turn the ignition switch on. We'll test for spark again. And then I want to remove the kill wire from that coil and try it again, see if there's any change. There's absolutely no spark. I've unplugged the kill wire from the coil. I'm going to try this again, see if we have any change. And we got nothing. So it would seem like we have a dead coil, which is hard to believe because this looks brand new. So let's try the old coil. Interesting. Yeah. Well, the coil wasn't connected to anything to ground it out. Though I think I see the terminal here where it was supposed to be. So it doesn't matter that I unplugged it from the coil because it wasn't hooked up to any source or ground. So not sure what's wrong with the coil, but we can do a quick ohms test on it to see where it's at. So to do this test, you just need a multimeter set to ohms, and you put one probe in the cap, and you touch the other one to the metal on the coil itself. Now, I don't know what the value should be on this coil. On newer Hondas, the coil itself is about 6,000 ohms, and the cap has a resistor in it of about 4,000 ohms. So on a newer style Honda, a healthy coil would come in at about 10,000 ohms. Interesting. Intermittent. So maybe there's a bad connection on the cap. Just going to pull it off and we'll test the coil directly. So I got one lead in the wire. Touch the metal again. And 6,000 ohms. So the coil's good. It seemed like maybe we had a bad connection on the cap. We get 11,000 ohms through the cap. Which is better than 0. We were getting 0 a second ago, so maybe that's expected. Let's pull the cap off this old coil and see what the ohms are on that. About the same. So I actually think this coil is good. It just wasn't making a good connection between the cap and the wire. So I'm going to cut this back just a little bit. We'll screw the cap back on and test it again. All right, let's try this again. Now we get 17,000 ohms. So that might be it. Let's throw this coil back on and see if it now creates a spark. Still nothing. Let's try the old coil. Nothing. What are the odds of two bad coils? I'd say very unlikely. Crisis averted, I think. I looked at the starter recoil and realized this engine spins counterclockwise. Most engines I work on made today spin clockwise. So I tried rotating the engine counterclockwise, still got no spark with the old coil. So I put the new one back on with the boot reseated, and now when I spin it, I have good spark. Let me show you. So that should run the engine. Let's get this torqued down a little bit better, and we'll get the recoil back on and try starting it like this. Just going to pull the cord. There should be some fuel left in that carburetor, hopefully enough to start it. If not, I'll use a bit of starting fluid just to make sure spark is no longer an issue. Still no spark. So I'm starting to think we do have a bad coil, even though it tested sort of okay-ish, and we did have spark before I put it together. So I'm going to pause it here. I'm going to pull it apart again and let you know what I find. I misread this. Seeing the rope on this side, I assumed it was wrapped around like this, which would rotate the engine counterclockwise. And that kind of made sense because that is the only time I get spark. But this, in fact, is wrapped like that. And when you pull it, it rotates the engine clockwise, like pretty much every engine that I've ever worked on. So I think to get spark, I would have to rotate this coil, flip it around, and spark would come in the right direction. But then this wire is now pointing the wrong way, and the tab for the kill wire is also on the wrong side. So although this is a good coil, I think it is meant for a different engine. So I'm going to place an order and get the correct part. I tried, but the correct part is discontinued. And that's surprising because almost every other part is still available on this engine. What makes things even worse is that there are no clone options and there's nothing on the used market. So really the only option I have is to turn around this coil, which it was not meant to go this way. The blower housing comes right up against here, and there's nowhere for this cable to exit. So what I'd like to do is just bolt it up like this. I'll leave the blower housing off. We'll try starting it with a rope. And assuming it starts and runs like this, then I'll turn my attention to modifying that blower housing to get this to work. If it does fire up, which I think it will like this, I'm not expecting that light to turn on. The governor spring's disconnected, so the throttle plate's going to slam shut, most likely before getting up to speed. I also drained the carb, so there's no fuel in there anymore, and the kill wire is disconnected. Nice. Let's try it again. Okay, I'd say that's a win. No light, so I'm going to try it one more time. It runs in this configuration. The engine sounds good and it makes power. So really the only thing left here is that I need to put a strategically placed hole on the right side of the blower housing to perfectly line up with where that wire is. So I'm going to spend a minute, take a few measurements, and drill a hole. So I'm guesstimating right about there where that X is. So I'm going to drill that out to 1/2 inch, and that should allow enough space for that wire to exit. That's pretty good. I think we have sufficient clearance. That wire isn't going to rub. So ideally, I would put something in between there just to prevent any kind of loss of cooling. Now, that's not a huge hole. I'm going to have to give that one some thought. I've tried a few things and nothing is really fitting. So I wouldn't call that a showstopper, but I do need to plug up the other side for sure. And also try this kill wire. The one that came with the coil might reach, but if it doesn't, I'll have to extend that a bit. Got pretty lucky on this kill wire. Didn't need to modify it at all. It fits just fine. And as far as where the ignition coil used to exit, I just reused the original part and cut off a piece of wire from the bad coil to plug the hole. So I'm going to glue that in place, but that should work fine for sealing that up. And as far as this side goes, I think I may have come up with a solution. I have a bushing for a plastic fuel tank. These go in the bottom of the plastic tank, and then you push like a barbed fitting for the fuel shutoff. And as luck would have it, it fits in there nice and snug, and the wire goes through. It's not super tight, but it forms a much better seal than not using it at all, and it also protects it from the sharp edges. So I think we're good to get this thing back together. All right, let's try this again. This time running on the carb. You know, I thought I was home free, but there's clearly something wrong. It's knocking pretty bad. Could be a timing issue, but it ran fine on starting fluid, but now it won't run well on gas. So let me disconnect the fuel. I'm going to drain the carb. We'll try it on starting fluid again, see if it'll run normally. No change. Clearly, I missed something putting this together. And I'm thinking the only thing that changed is that I cut the wire and screwed that boot back on. So potentially it's not making a good connection. So I'm going to pause it here, just double check things and show you what I find. Okay, I'm on to something here. All I did was remove these bolts right here so I could kind of reach down and disconnect the kill wire. And now that that's disconnected, I get a very different result. Let me show you. Thankfully, this one should be fairly easy to solve. There's only a few things that can be grounding out that coil, and it's only periodically doing it. So I'm guessing when I start it, you know, something shakes and it periodically grounds out. So it's either the low oil system or there is a switch on the backside here. So when you flip this up to on, it should unground the coil, but maybe just the act of starting it is shaking something and causing it to ground out periodically. So I do need to peel a couple layers off so I can get a better look at what's going on. So there is definitely an issue going on here. I've got the multimeter set to ohms. I've got one lead hooked up to the kill wire and the other one just to the ground on part of the engine. And I'm getting a value of 1.7 thousand ohms and the switch is on. So there should be no connection there at all. And that's why we were getting pretty poor spark and that bad backfiring. So I'm just going to slide the switch to off, and this should ground out better than it is now. And it does, 0.5 ohms, so that is solidly off. So I'm going to put that back to on, and I'm going to start just by disconnecting the switch. We'll take it out of circuit, see if that changes anything. And no change. We're still at 1.7 thousand ohms. So now I'm thinking it could be the oil sensor. Let's find that. As far as the low oil sensor goes, it's not clear to me exactly which wire it is. You know, we have this yellow and green coming out of the block. That's definitely the oil switch, and it comes over here and plugs into this harness. So just looking at the components here, there's really only a few possibilities on where the low oil module would be. You know, I see here what looks to be a capacitor, so most likely this is brushless. There's another module here that potentially could be it. And the only other thing I would say is maybe this right here. And it does have a yellow wire going into it, so I would say, you know, that could be it. And actually it's connected up here, and I'm guessing that that is the low oil light. So yeah, I think it's this one. Let's take this out of circuit and see if we get a change. And still no change. So I'm going to pull the connector itself and see if that goes down, because if it doesn't, then I'm going to be at a loss. And that did it. We have an open circuit. So there is something going on. Going to look at this a little bit more closely, because bypassing what appears to be the oil sensor and the ignition switch did not do it. So maybe there's something I missed. Actually, I did miss something. This switch actually has two wires. There's another one under here. So the green wire, I'm guessing, is the connection to the engine ground, and the black wire probably is the one that feeds the coil. So let's plug this connector back in and disconnect that wire. Nope. All right, that's it. It's this module right here, which is most likely the low oil module itself. So I'm going to reconnect everything else I disconnected just to make 100% sure. And that did it. Everything's reconnected except for this module down here, and there's no connection to ground. So this should run. You know, I did double check the switch. It is still in circuit and connected, so we will be able to shut the generator down. Now, I did take a look online. I guess I wanted to confirm what this was, and Honda calls it an ignition module. You know, most likely that is the oil module. That provides a delay, so it doesn't shut down immediately when it senses low oil, and when it does sense it for about 5 seconds, it'll shut the engine down and latch it so that the engine completely shuts down. Anyway, that part seems to not be available according to most sites, but a couple do list it as available. So potentially I could replace that. You know, I know I need to place an order anyway for the air filter and potentially more. So I do want to get it back together like this, put it through its paces, and just make sure there's no other issues. That's more like it. It's running much better. Granted, we now have carb issues, but that is pretty much the story with every generator. So I guess I'll tear the carb off, take a quick peek. I do have the original carb as well, so maybe I'll just swap them out. So my bench is full of other projects right now, so I'm going to have to do this one right here. Looks pretty clean. Yeah, potentially this isn't the right carburetor. I know that ignition coil was not the right one, so I'm going to take a peek at the original carburetor and just compare the two. They look the same, but the one on the right, I think, is a clone. Honda clones usually work pretty well, but I don't know for sure if this is for this engine. So I think I'm going to try this one, but let's open it up and see what it looks like inside. It's definitely different looking, but it does look pretty clean. So I think I'm just going to bolt this one on and see how it does. Yeah, actually, I know why it looks different. I think the float is on upside down. Yep. Gonna swap the floats. That one is not making a good seal. Unfortunately, the spring is stretched out, or something's not right, because there's no tension on that spring. So I think I need to take this back off and correct that, because that will cause surging if there's no tension on that spring. Okay, two things. First, it's blowing some smoke. Hopefully that'll burn off. And the detent for the choke doesn't seem to be working on that carb. So even though it's running it well, it may not be usable. Now, this one I'm having second thoughts about, because that spring was loose. That would have caused surging as well. So maybe this carb actually is okay. Anyway, I need to pull that off again, see if I can fix that choke lever. Otherwise, I might have to go back to this one. The detent, it's broken off, unfortunately. So, back to the other carb. I think I'm starting to see the issue here. The gasket, I mean, it's not in great shape, but I don't think that's the problem. You see the alignment is off. You know, something doesn't look right. So I think this is on upside down. And that's restricting the flow the way that it was. And I would say creating a vacuum leak. Yeah, that looks a lot better. So let's try that. Gonna catch you up real quick. It's been a while, and I've been at this for quite some time. The newer carburetor just is not running well. It's running too lean, and nothing I did would fix that. So I ended up going with the old carburetor, and the broken detent actually is not an issue because this here latches on to the choke and holds it in place. And this carburetor is running it pretty well, but it's still lean and surging a bit. So there were a few things I corrected. First off, the governor rod spring was stretched out, so I got some tension on that. The gasket between the carb and the engine was very suspect. I thought there might be a vacuum leak there, so I made up a gasket. That really didn't improve things. It was still a bit lean. So now I put the airbox on and kind of made a filter. I wouldn't say this is the permanent solution, but what I want to do is run it with the airbox on, going through the filter, and that'll put a little bit of drag on things and richen things up, hopefully enough to consider this a good carb. So let's give it a try. That's it. 126 volts, 62 hertz. Let's try loading it up. Perfect. Not too bad. The engine speed was perfect, and so was the voltage. So no adjustments necessary. Loaded it to 750 watts, and things ran just fine. So the carburetor's doing a good job. So is the power head. And the output. I wouldn't say it's clean, but as I saw inside, this is a brushless generator. There was a capacitor in there, and that sine wave is exactly what a brushless output looks like. So I'm going to place an order. We'll get the correct air filter, see if I can't locate that oil module, and then just finish this up. All right, I want to catch you guys up. It's actually been 4 weeks, and I did order this ignition module from 2 different places, and both vendors promptly canceled the order, saying they could not fill it. So this module is discontinued, just like this coil. That said, I did find one on eBay. It was from a German seller. He wanted $160 for it. And yeah, that's not going to happen. Now, I do want the oil system to work. And I was looking at alternatives on how to do that. Specifically, could this newer style low oil module be fitted into this generator? So I pulled up a parts diagram and was kind of shocked to see that the ignition module has nothing to do with the low oil system. The low oil switch goes right over to this low oil alert unit, and that connects right to the coil to ground it out. So even without this module, I think the oil system is 100% functional, and I'll test that out in a bit. But that makes me wonder, what is this? There's only 2 wires coming out of it, and according to the parts diagram, the green wire goes right to ground, and the black wire goes right to the kill tab on the coil. So this logically can only kill spark. So what conditions have to be met to kill spark? What is this measuring? And I think the name of this unit says a lot. It's an ignition unit, not a kill ignition unit, which is what the oil module does. So that got me thinking, does this have electronic ignition built into it? And I think the answer is no, because when I dug even deeper, I found another diagram that called this a TRMG unit, and another diagram called it a TUMU unit. And they did have a legend on there that described what that was, and it stands for a transistorized magneto ignition unit. So I think this is taking the place of a Points and condenser, which means this coil could be used on either system. And in this case, it's hooked up to this. And the way theoretically it functions is that normally this is making a connection and creating a circuit in the primary. And when it senses a pulse as the magnet goes by, it most likely opens the circuit, which is the equivalent of opening the points, collapses the field in the primary, creates a voltage spike in the primary and a much larger voltage spike in the secondary. So I think these could potentially work. You know, when I tested this, I had this wire disconnected, so it would have had no chance of sparking. I did check the resistance. This coil seems to be fine. You know, whether this is or not, I don't know. I found a service manual. It didn't say how to test this. All it said was if you're not getting spark, disconnect the oil switch, disconnect the oil alert system, and disconnect the on-off switch. If you still have no spark, replace this. But in this case, it's not an option. Not to mention, these are both obsolete parts, about 30 years old, and the part I put in there is brand new and has the ignition module built in. So I think I'm going to leave things as they are. You know, this thing's running well like this. So I think what I'm going to do next is just get the oil out. We'll try to test this and put everything back together. I want to get this outside, run it for an extended period, like 1 or 2 hours, and just make sure there's no other gremlins in here. The oil is drained, spark plug removed, and the ignition turned on. So I'm going to pull the engine over a few times and see if I can't get this low oil light to come on. Okay, that was easy. The oil system seems to be fine. And yes, I did glue up that plug and added some to that bushing as well. So that is not going anywhere. Also, as far as this cover goes, I thought there was something missing here, but that actually is an access port that is supposed to remain open. And by that opening being there, it allows you to adjust the governor so you can increase and decrease the engine speed and also drain the bowl. And I did manage to find the OEM replacement filter. So put that one in. According to the manual, you are supposed to oil this filter. And most foam filters you do oil. Actually, this one looks like it came pre-oiled, but a lot of filters do not. And if it does not come pre-oiled, you should oil it if it's a foam filter. And then I usually use a paper towel and just soak off the excess. In this case, it seems to be the right amount, so we're good to go. Looks like we got a bit of smoke. I'm going to put a 750 watt load on for a bit, see if that burns off. Okay, that was unexpected. Let's see if it'll restart. Gonna try a 750 watt load again. Very interesting. The smoke seems to have gone away. It took a while, about 8 or 10 minutes, but it is consistently stalling when under a 750 watt load. It's acting like it's running out of fuel or maybe having an ignition problem. So the last time it stalled, I did turn the fuel off. So I'm going to bring this back inside, crack the bowl drain, and see what comes out. There's plenty of fuel making it to the carburetor. So a lack of fuel is not causing the issue, which is pretty odd because it is consistently running without a load. And it's not until I load it up that it runs for about 25 seconds, give or take. And that's pretty consistent. After 25 seconds, it shuts down. Now, given we have plenty of fuel, it really sounded like ignition, but I can't correlate why a load would cause trouble with ignition. Those two should be unrelated, so I need to give this one some thought. I'm going to try this again, this time with the spark tester connected, so that way we can visually see if we're losing spark. Spark is not the issue. The engine shut down, we had good spark. So something else is going on. It's not fuel, it's not spark. I still feel good compression and timing. That's not something that's going to change based on load. So if I had to guess, I'd say there's an issue with the spark plug itself. So before chasing too many things, I'm going to order up a new spark plug and give that a try. The whole reason I got this generator was because it would only run 5 to 10 minutes and shut down. And now that I've fixed it, I think I'm back to the original problem. It's only running until I put a load on it, and then it shuts down. So everything I've done up until now, I think, has just been correcting some issues that were created while troubleshooting maybe the real issue. I'm not sure, but I already ordered a new spark plug. And to be honest, I've never had a bad spark plug, but this might be a bad spark plug. It is a resistor plug, which means you're not going to get like a direct connection if you test it. You're going to get a resistance value somewhere usually between the 4 and 6,000 range. So I thought I'd double check it. 5.2 thousand, that seems perfectly reasonable. And the other check I like to do is just check here. There should be no connection because this is where the electrode is connected and this is the ground essentially to the engine. So we're good. Or are we? The one thing I know is that this runs fine until I put a load under it. And what's different when under a load? More fuel, more heat. That's it. So, on a whim, I applied some heat, and let me show you what I found. All right, we're somewhere between 330 and 400 degrees Fahrenheit. We're getting some very erratic readings. But the lowest number I'm seeing is about 2 million ohms. And it's climbing rapidly as the plug is cooling. So there should be no connection there. And the fact that there is going to kill spark, and it's not going to deliver it to the tip of the plug where it belongs. So I've got a new plug on the way. With any luck, that'll solve this problem. It's the next day, and I couldn't wait. The plug I ordered was going to take about 2 weeks to get here. So instead, I ran down to my local power sports store, and they had the plug I needed, which was an NGK BR4HS. The plug that came out of this machine was actually a Denso, and it's also listed in the Honda manual as being the correct plug for this generator. It's a W14FR-U. Anyway, I'm going to install this, and I'll meet outside. Hopefully, it'll stay running. It's been warming up for a few minutes, so I'm going to apply a 750 watt load and see if it keeps running. I think that did it. It's been about 2 minutes. Things are running just fine. It is smoking again, but this was shipped through the mail. Most likely there's oil in that exhaust, so I'm just going to let it keep running for a bit. Who would have guessed? It was just a bad plug. And for $3.85, we now have a new NGK plug, which is running this engine just fine. I let it run for about 30 minutes with a load on it, and the smoking went away, held the load. It does have me concerned a bit because it has smoked on several occasions. So I am going to heat cycle this a few more times just to make sure there's not an issue going on. And I guess if there is, there'll be another video on this. But, this was shipped through the mail with oil in it, and I'm sure it was tipped sideways, and that exhaust most likely just has oil in it. And up until now, I really haven't been able to get this up to temp because it would shut down 30 seconds after putting a load on it. But, this one was a challenge. There were a lot of things that had to be corrected, and then ultimately, I think the original issue still existed, and that was a bad plug. So, I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.